Would you like to be able to sell your construction company either externally to buyers or internally to people who are currently in your organization? If that's going to happen, you have to be able to do three things. Number one, you have to diversify relationships, you have to diversify decision making, and then you have to diversify expertise. These are just three of the topics my guest and I dive into today on Construction Genius. And my guest is Brent Beshore. He is the CEO of Permanent Equity. Permanent Equity is a company that invests in North American companies with owner earnings of $2.5 to $15 million a year. I know that many construction companies struggle with this issue of making themselves attractive to outside buyers or passing the company on to internal candidates. And today's podcast is going to give you a number of essential insights on what you have to do in order to accomplish that goal. So enjoy my conversation here with Brent. I know you'll find it very helpful. Thank you for listening to Construction Genius. This is Eric Anderton, and you're listening to Construction Genius, a leadership masterclass. Thomas Edison said that genius is 1% inspiration and 99% perspiration. If you're a construction leader, you know all about the perspiration, and this show is all about the 1% inspiration that you can add to your hard work to help you to improve your leadership. Brent, welcome to Construction Genius.
Hey, thanks, Eric.
What is the one thing that a construction company owner needs to do in order to make their business attractive for a potential buyer?
Yeah, probably ironically, it's to become worthless, or maybe not worthless, but selectively useful would be. It's to remove yourself from enough parts of the business to where you can choose to get involved in something, but you're not necessarily required, which shows that there's something there to be transferred. If all the relationships are tied up in, the owner's relationships and the skill sets and expertise that they have, which is easily just to discount those and to think that, it's not that way. But the true test is, can you, go on a month-long vacation and no one would notice? And if you can't, you probably got some transfer issues.
What do you think are the biggest transfer issues in your experience working with companies that a CEO has? Where are those points where they have a hard time letting go?
Yeah, I would say key relationships are always an issue. Probably even more of an issue though than those is just control and decision making. Mm-hmm. So one of the questions we always like to ask whenever we're talking with a potential seller is what are the types of decisions that you can only make? And, they'll kind of, stumble and bumble around and say, well, there's a lot of people can make decisions. And, we say, okay, great. But can they, you don't check off on those? And they'll say, oh no, I check off on almost all the decisions. And it's like, well, then they're not making the decisions you are, right? I mean, if you need to approve all the decisions, then really the decisions being made is by you. And by the way, as an owner, and especially if you're in the CEO role, it's not bad to make decisions. It's just to be aware of those and how transferable are those decisions. So is somebody coming to you and you're rubber stamping them and you're not disagreeing with them? Or are you often leading things? And I think those are the big difference. Skill set's another one that's really difficult. Sometimes a lot of the expertise in these projects, especially for subcontractor relationships, are tied up in the owner's knowledge and skill sets themselves. So really diversifying that and getting people as skilled or even more skilled around you, which, all these things require a tremendous amount of humility and really a self-confidence that is frankly very difficult for a lot of people.
Okay, so let me just go back up a little bit. The first thing I'm hearing in my mind is, if I'm going to take on a construction project, someone has to assume the risk there. And the person assuming the risk is usually the owner. They're the ones signing the contract, and there's a lot on the line when they take on a project. And so I can sympathize with a lot of construction company owners and senior executives because their butts are on the line when they take on a project. How do they get to the point where they're coming in at the point where perhaps they need to sign the contract, but all the decisions leading up to that are made by other people? How can you get there?
It's a great question. I mean, I think this is the issue, not just in construction, but in all business, right? I mean, if the one signing, you're the one personally responsible for it. You are taking the risk and other people are assuming less risk. I mean, that's the the joke I have is that the main job of the owner is to be the shit umbrella, right? And stuff happens, right? Sometimes you need more than an umbrella; you need a shed, right? So I would say it comes down to, like you would in any business. Construction is really no different. Is you got to have great people around you that are thoughtful and talented and well trained, and you have processes for eliminating risk. And so when you go to sign it, whether or not you've been directly involved at the level that maybe you would previously, that you feel confident that the numbers that are in there are solid, that your margins can hold, that there's not undue risk, that things won't go sideways, that your labor costs won't explode. I mean, these are the typical things that, at least in our subcontracting businesses, that we look for. And I think that all of those just takes a lot of time and trust to build, that's the real value. If you want to think about a saleable asset, is what's something that take a tremendous amount of time and money to build. And if I went to you and said, okay, hey, look, I'll give you $20 million. I want you to build the best, fill in the blank contracting business. You couldn't do it in a year. Right? There's no way you can do it in a year. You got to find people. You got to have them work together. You got to develop your systems and processes. You got to have that real skill set sort of diversified down into the organization. You want to have, we call creative abrasion, meaning, different people having different perspectives, and a culture that can call out risk and not, sort of call out risk independent of calling out people. All those things are things that go in the mix of a successful company. And oftentimes, look, a lot of what the owners are doing in these businesses that, we call them having owner moat, or the competitive advantages with the owner, is the owner serving a lot of these roles and is kind of a chameleon in the sense that they have this deep expertise, they have the relationships, they really know what they're doing, they're de-risking it constantly, but they're not telling people how they're de-risking it. They're just doing it intuitively. Systematizing that intuition is just outrageously difficult because it requires a level of self-awareness that frankly is just unnatural.
Okay, so this is really good. We got some good stuff here. First, we have this idea of creative abrasion. What is the relationship between the owner or the owner's humility and self-confidence and the amount of creative abrasion they're willing to tolerate?
Yeah. I mean, you got to be humble to think that good ideas can come from anywhere. And you got to be willing to listen to a lot of different people. You also have the confidence and the judgment to know that some people are going to know more about certain areas than others, and they're going to perhaps lack self-awareness. So it requires a lot of, a combination of confidence and humility and self-awareness, which again, these are easy things to talk about. They're incredibly difficult in practice. And I think that's where I would recommend that taking steps towards creating that saleable asset, creating those systems, is just to really walk day by day and to say, okay, we're going to follow the same process. And when that process breaks, or when that process reveals error, then we're going to correct our process. And you're continually refining. That takes 3 to 5 years, I would say, at a minimum, of just constant grinding on it, and really being able to move the culture in a direction that tolerates that. And so look, let's just, as a base, we're people, we're messy, we're fallible, we all have our moments, right? And some increasingly more than others, right? And so
sometimes we have our years, not just our moments.
Exactly, 2020. So when you look at you get one messy person and they collide with another messy person, that's why I say that creative abrasion, which can either be real positive or real negative. I mean, if you have big egos and everyone's trying to protect their pride, they're trying to it's my idea. Or the biggest title in the room has all the ideas. Right. What you're going to end up doing is you're going to end up shutting down that really valuable process where people can bubble up ideas and bubble up risk as well. I mean, in construction, it's as much as bubbling up the risk factors as it is anything else. And so I'd say is developing those systems where you're keeping track and really monitoring what are the major risk factors, where are we on those, up-to-date information and data. I mean, I think is another big area that we haven't really talked about. It's impossible to make good real-time decisions without real-time data. And oftentimes, a lot of the construction businesses that we interact with, their data will lag 3 or 4 months. They won't close their books for 60 days afterwards. Well, it's impossible to say if a project's going well. I mean, even if you're using some, cost to completion accounting heuristics that you can kind of, get a rough idea of how things are going. It's still impossible to really know unless you put pen to paper and understand, what the numbers are showing you.
Let me ask you this. How do you systematize intuition?
Yeah, well, by definition, intuition is, you're internally processing a tremendous amount of information. So you're pinging, if you want to think about it, you're pinging all your past experiences, you're pinging your sort of learnings, the books you've read, the articles you've read, the training you've received. And so really what you have to break down and say is, okay, what are all the sources of best practices? And what are all the heuristics? Heuristics mean kind of shortcuts. Yep. That you would have to know if something is worth doing or not, is valuable or not, is risky or not, has upside or not, all these things. And then really you start writing those down into systems and develop processes where checklists become a pretty regular thing that you're running through. A great book on this topic is called The Checklist Manifesto. If you or your clients have not read that, I would highly recommend it. And really what it says is in the book, it's written by a doctor who shows that they're able to dramatically reduce mortality rates at the hospital. And these are for highly trained physicians. These are physicians that do this every day, right?
Right.
If you just use a checklist, if they say, okay, before you take off, right? If you're going to use the plane analogy, right? And this is why checklists are so important in aviation. You got to check every one of these boxes. And yes, does it take more time? Absolutely. 97, 99, 99, 99.99% of the time, is it going to really matter if you went through the checklist? No. But will it prevent catastrophic failure? Will it prevent really bad decisions from being made accidentally? Absolutely. And so I think that's where, as you develop, each company is going to be a little bit different, and each company is going to have a different way of going about it. But I think that's what becomes really valuable is a buyer can come in and say, oh, wow, you have clearly outlined, if this happens, then we do this. If this happens, we do this. Here's where we think, here are the we call them key performance indicators, KPI. Yep. That we're monitoring on a daily, weekly basis. The more that you can show that type of thing, the more that a buyer can say, oh, wow, this is a de-risked investment, which means they can pay more for it. And you'll attract a lot more buyers because the skill set of the buyer matters less.
Let me just ask you this real quick. What are the key KPIs that you're looking at when you are considering an acquisition of a construction company?
Yeah, it's a great question. So I would say we really want to understand how they're doing cost to completion accounting is really important. How accurate are they in their billings? Where are they in their billing cycles? Are they doing pretty dramatic overbillings? Are they underbilling? What is their capital cycle? So how long does it take to get accounts receivable in? Yes. What does their accounts payable look like? Yes. We're looking at turnover at every level in the organization in terms of personnel. So you oftentimes especially in the more blue collar sectors, you'll have incredibly high turnover at the sort of entry level positions. That necessarily may not be terrible depending on the situation, and none of the KPIs are we call deal killers, right? They just tell a story. What you're trying to understand, anytime you're going to get to know something, especially as a buyer of something, the seller is always going to be a superior position of knowledge, right? Far superior position. And so what you're trying to understand is, what are they concerned about? What are they monitoring, and why are they monitoring it? And where's maybe things that they're monitoring they don't even know that they're monitoring? It would be a good example.
So tell me more about that, what you just said there, things that they're monitoring that they don't even know they're monitoring.
Yeah, well, so oftentimes when you ask somebody, what do you pay attention to? So one of the questions we always ask is, what are you paying attention to on a daily basis, a weekly basis, monthly basis, to know if you're on the right track or the wrong track? And they'll list a whole bunch of things that are very good things to monitor, right? And then you say, but how do you know? And it depends on what they answer. How do you know X, right? And they'll say, oh, well, I just, I ask this person, I pay attention to this. And oftentimes it's not obvious to them what they're actually paying attention to. Most people, let's just call a spade a spade. In construction, you're running into jobs, you're trying to answer the phone, you're trying to do bids, you're talking to your bonding agent. It is a helter-skelter life. And oftentimes you're having to make, sort of fly by the seat of your pants judgments. And that's where the value of a really well-trained person, often the seller, is so incredibly valuable. They're doing things they don't even know. Whereas, maybe, somebody gives you a call, one of your superintendents gives you a call and says, hey, look, we just ran over, budget on labor. We're way over. We got a stop order because somebody, OSHA violation or something like that. What should we do? Well, if you weren't, if you didn't have 30 years of experience and hadn't seen that situation 15 times, you might do something completely different. And oh, by the way, have to learn into all the same mistakes.
Right.
So I think this is where it's easy for an owner to, especially a very active owner, to undersell how valuable they are to the business, not because they're trying to be deceptive at all, but just because they really don't understand. And that goes back to your original question, which is, how do you know? And it's, if you're worthless, right, or selectively useful,
right?
If you can choose to get involved in things or not, then what that means is there really is a diversification and a spreading out of that expertise and skill that will allow you to transfer the organization.
Okay, so there's three core things that I've pulled so far out of our discussion. The first one is that you have to have strong processes. The strong processes then can enable you to get good data. And then you have to infuse the processes and the data with the strength of the relationships that you have both internally and externally. Am I hearing you right there?
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, I think ultimately, business goes at the speed of trust. And so developing that trust, amongst the staff and sort of lowering the temperature in the room to where when, we talk about ideas, not about people.
Right.
And so we talk about ideas independent of the person who's offering them up, which takes a strong leader. I mean, we all have protective egos.
It does. You do a lot of investing in family businesses. How do the best companies overcome the tendency to nepotism?
Yeah, maybe it'd be important first to define nepotism. People think that nepotism is just having your children or a relative work in the business. That's not nepotism at all. Right. In fact, some of the best people that I've encountered, especially in construction, come from families with construction backgrounds. Right.
Absolutely.
It's a great entryway. So I would say nepotism, what it really means is you're putting somebody in a position that they are unqualified for merely due to the fact that they are a relative. Yeah. Right. And look, I don't know how else to say this other than just don't do that. How do you avoid it? Be objective about your sons and daughters and about your uncles and aunts and brothers and sisters and say, look, if somebody is highly qualified, I've interacted with organizations where there's 4 or 5 or 6 family members working in the business. They're all incredibly talented. They treat it very professionally and it works wonderfully. I've also seen crazy disasters where people are risen to a level in the organization that they never should have. No one respects them, but they're the son or the daughter of the owner, and they're automatically 22 years old, executive vice president because they have the same last name, and they don't know what they're doing, and it just causes an incredible amount of friction. What I would recommend is anybody who in your family who you think should work in the business, go have them get their teeth cut somewhere else, go prove themselves somewhere else. Mm-hmm. Some outside perspective, learn some different systems than you have internally. And then when you feel like that they're ready to come back and they're ready to, they feel they're ready, then you can bring them in and they have sort of outside proof points that can really guard against even the perception of nepotism, which can be really damaging to a culture. Regardless of if it is actually nepotism or if it's the perception of nepotism, it's certainly going to be toxic.
Would you have them do tours of duty in each aspect of the business when you bring them back? Do you think that's necessary?
I think if they're going to be a CEO candidate, I certainly do. I always use the analogy of kind of the kitchen, right? You got to be the line cook, and then you want to be the pastry chef, and you want to be the sous chef and the assistant sous chef and all those roles. Because if you're going to be chef, how would you know if the sous chef's doing a good job unless you've been sous chef, right? You got to kind of work your way around the business. So if they're going to be a candidate for running the company, I would say whatever possibilities that they're going to be over, they should work in those and really work their way up through those pieces of business. If the person's going to come in and really they're highly trained in finance and they're going to be the CFO, then it's not necessary, right? And I think it can be counterproductive in some ways to really put them into positions that their personality or skill sets are not designed for.
Yes.
So it's really situationally dependent.
Okay, excellent. There's many different ways that construction companies attempt to structure their businesses in order to be attractive to people who are looking to buy them. In your mind, what are the best structures that attract you as a buyer that would make you want to invest in those companies?
Yeah, well, so I think in many ways, buying and selling is kind of like a dating process, right? Mm-hmm. And you want to be eligible to the most amount of people to sort of widen the top of your funnel, if you want to think about it as a sales process, right? Mm. the things that shrink the funnel are anything that would make the seller ineligible outside of having the financial resources to be a part of it, and sort of the cultural fit to be a part of the organization. Mm-hmm. So those would potentially be, if you rely heavily on small business set-aside contracts as an example, or if you rely heavily on contracts, assigned to minorities or women-owned businesses or things like that. Those are types of things that you can make the decision. And by the way, there's nothing wrong with those. Those just limit the pool of buyers that could come in and be able to transfer that value. I mean, if it's a women set-aside business, women-owned business, and all the contracts are awarded underneath that umbrella, then you've eliminated 50% of the population from buying the business, right? I mean, just by definition. So I would say that things like that can be difficult. Right. I would also say that if you have a stranglehold on the leadership, meaning that you as the seller are crucial, and or the people around you are all going to kind of retire at the same time, right? We see this often. It's like, hey, the top 4 guys in the company all want to leave at the same time. We've all come up together. We've all done this for a real long time. What that means is, if you think about it from a buyer's perspective, that means they're buying a company that the top people in the organization that got it to where it is, they're all leaving, right? Yep. They certainly had some value, or the organization wouldn't have grown and wouldn't be successful the way it is. Now they're tasked with not only writing a check and sort of being qualified culturally, but they also got to find those top 4 people. And the odds that somebody's, a buyer is going to have 4 awesome people that are all ready to get going immediately, it's almost impossible. There's no way. So what I would say is, the more that you can, again, diversify your relationships, diversify the expertise, diversify the decision-making, and have it be disconnected with whomever is not going to stay with the business. That could be person, that could be 3 or 4 people, whatever that is, the more likely you're going to find somebody that can step into those shoes successfully.
That's interesting. Diversify relationships, diversify expertise, diversify decision-making. In your experience working with companies that successfully make that transition to the next generation of leadership, how do they handle that identification of talent so that they're able to pick the next generation successfully?
Yeah, it's a great question. I mean, I would say there's only one way to try to predict what the future is going to hold, and it's what past performance has been. So, I mean, either you need to identify people and sort of fast track people within the organization itself, and really be brutally honest. Unfortunately, I see a lot of people wishing the skill sets and attitudes and expertise of people within their companies were different than they really are, and they're unrealistic about what they can do. I mean, there's the principle that you sort of rise in the organization to your level of incompetence, right? Meaning that you're really, really good at whatever level you're doing. And of course, the first thing somebody's going to do is say, "Oh, you're great at that. I'm going to assume you're going to be great at this other thing." Yeah. And so oftentimes you get into a position where you are unqualified, and really it's an uncomfortable situation for everyone. What I would say is, having open dialogues and conversations. I mean, some people, even if they're talented, they may not be in a life position, a season that they want to run a company, right? Yes. And really being transparent with them about what that is, and being realistic. I mean, being CEO is attractive until you're actually CEO, and then you find out it's brutally difficult, incredibly stressful. I mean, I joke all the time that running a small business is like eating glass, right, on a daily basis. Yep. It's so difficult. Or, another analogy is the knife fight, right? You just get out of bed and try not to get stabbed, and then get back into bed and do it all over again. Yeah, right. It's incredibly difficult. Unless you've run a company, it's impossible to understand that level of stress. And so I would say is, a lot of people also have a fantasy idea about what running a company is really like, that is just wholly disconnected from reality. Yes. So being realistic and really, I would say is creating a mentorship program. Yes. Is something that we've seen work really well. And look, I don't know how much of this needs to be formalized, make a big deal about it, tell the company so-and-so has now entered a formal mentee process that, yes. I mean, a lot of people are going to roll their eyes and be like, oh, look at that kiss ass, right? Yeah. That's not what you need to do. I think that it's far more powerful when you can take people, show them that you really care about their inputs, try to help train them along the way, and really educate them in real world situations, and then give them more and more opportunity to step up. And by the way, Sometimes it happens where you give people the opportunity to step up, they're going to fall flat on their face. At that point, you have to decide, okay, they fell flat on their face, they learned a lesson. That's a heck of an education, maybe sometimes even expensive education.
Yep.
Okay, now they're more valuable to you. Do you continue to reinvest back into them, or are they continually making missteps and you really say, hey, we need to cut bait, this is not worth it? And by the way, that doesn't mean you fire them. It just means you're probably not going to put them in the same candidate pool for that future position. The other way to do it, it's either going to be internal talent or it's going to be external talent,
yep.
right? Another really powerful way is to find what I would say competitors or tangential competitors. Sometimes
yep.
you don't have to pull somebody directly out of your industry that have risen to a level in an organization that you respect. So I always ask our companies that we're talking with, if you had to buy one company in your industry, who would be the company you'd buy? Right?
That's a great question right there.
Yeah. So what that gets at is if you have to invest, right, and you know what you're doing, who would you invest in? And what that gets to is what are really well-run companies? Well, those are great candidates for going on LinkedIn. It's super simple. Go on LinkedIn, right, or find, go to their website, find the guys that are, or their women who are, maybe younger, that are in VP positions, that have sort of risen more quickly in the organization than you'd expect. And develop relationships, have conversations with them, right? Either the talent's going to come from there or it's going to come from internal.
What happens with a lot of CEOs is they pick someone and then they make it public and then it doesn't work out and they do it all over again and they lose credibility with their people through that picking process. So it's a dance it's very challenging for a lot of people to be able to execute.
Well, I would say, if you find yourself in a position where you're making grand declarations that aren't working out very often, you're probably prematurely declaring victory, right? You're probably putting somebody in a position where you're not doing the hard work to really get to know them, see them in a lot of situations and let things season. If you're going to elevate somebody to the position of CEO, there's always going to be exceptions to every rule, right? So,
sure.
Look, if there's an emergency or health issues or something, that's a totally different ballgame. But if you're really trying to do an orderly transition, way before you ever put somebody in a position to be CEO, you should be well confident, and they should already be performing the job of CEO well before you give them the title.
3 to 5 years away from retirement, and I'm feeling it's kind of too late to set up my business for success. What are some immediate steps I should be taking in order to make myself more attractive to an outside buyer?
It's a great question. Well, first I would say, even if you're 3 years away from retirement, it's never too late. There's a lot of things that if you really put yourself into them, you can get done pretty quickly. Culture can change. It's scary. People don't love it, but culture can change. And I would say really taking stock, doing an appraisal of where you are in those key areas, right? So where are you in your processes? Where are you in your relationships? Where are you in the decision-making? And intentionally every day waking up and saying, okay, I'm going to build more processes today. I'm going to see what processes, I'm going to evaluate our processes and understand where are they falling down, where are they breaking, right? Make them better. I would work every day to say, okay, what relationships today can I diversify in the organization? Mm-hmm. What skill sets am I bringing to the table that no one else in the organization has? And I either need to go out and grow them or find them. Right. And ultimately, just continue to diversify decision-making. What are decisions that I'm going to ask everyone else to start making that I've historically made? Oftentimes you'll see owners signing every check, right? That's kind of almost a point of pride in construction. I sign every check, right? Yep. And unfortunately, look, there is when you're small and you're working in the business and you have no horizon to get out, there is a wisdom in being able to monitor the business through signing checks, right? I'm not saying that that's not true. It is a valuable thing. The only issue is that there's an opportunity cost to that. Everything in life has opportunity costs, meaning if you do that one thing, you can't do something else. If you're spending all your days head down signing checks and harassing people over $10, $15, guess what you're not doing? You're not diversifying your relationships. You're not diversifying your decision-making. You're not building skill sets. You're not recruiting outside talent. You're not building those processes. So, I would say it's like anything else. You got to prioritize it and say, okay, am I going to be less successful this year and next year financially because I put an emphasis on my time and attention on building a more sustainable business? Absolutely. Of course, right? That's the big difference between quality and quantity of earnings. You can make more money in any given year by making shortcuts, by doing the wrong thing. That's just not quality of earnings, right? Because you got to pedal as fast as you can. You're going to hit what we call the ceiling of brute force, right? Where no matter how hard you pedal, you can never break through it. And so by necessity, you've got to decrease your earnings, not intentionally. I'm not asking you to, of course, never intentionally damage the business, but just be okay with a little bit of slippage, right? Maybe you don't win that, final contract that gives you an extra, $300,000 a year of earnings that year because you really worked hard to say, okay, I'm intentionally not going to do that bid. I'm going to let this guy who I really think needs the experience do the bid, work through it. And by the way, they're going to make mistakes, and that's okay, because guess what? You made a lot of mistakes.
Key insight right there. A key insight. And this is so difficult for construction company owners to do, is to make a conscious decision to potentially take lower revenues for a short period of time in order to go through that process of diversifying relationships, building your processes, and diffusing decision-making throughout the organization. That's absolutely essential. I tell you, Brent, I really, really appreciate your time here today. Your company is Permanent Equity. I love that URL, permanentequity.com. Tell me a little bit about what you do and how people can get in touch with you if they'd like to.
Yeah, so technically we're private equity. Private equity has a pretty bad name in most businesses, especially lower end of family businesses. In many ways, we're the opposite of private equity. So private equity, the typical MO is to find your company, lever it up, strip it of a bunch of resources, try to maximize cash flow short term, and then try to flip it to somebody else for a higher price, right? That is in many ways literally the opposite of what we do. So we have a very long time horizon. It's our fund life is minimum of 27 years, and we have more time after that if we want it. So what that allows us to do is to make good long-term decisions, right? It's impossible to make long-term decisions with short-term capital. So we're able to be very patient. We're able to come in and not use debt. So typically most of our transactions, especially in construction, use no debt at all. We think that businesses that are cyclical, which construction typically is a cyclical business, the worst possible thing you can do is to put a bunch of operational debt on it and put yourself into a stressful situation. It's already stressful enough to run a business without having to have bank covenants to meet. And so we typically are using no debt. And then what we like to do is partner with families to transition them. We like to partner with leadership that's already in place. We very much prefer to work with existing leadership when at all possible. And so what we're doing is we're coming in, we're partnering, we're buying typically a majority of the company. In construction related companies, we really like to be in kind of that 60 to 75% range, maybe at close, partnering with the leadership team to have them roll forward a lot of equity. And then we all grow it together. And the goal is by the time, those equity holders are ready to transfer to the sort of the next grouping of equity holders, that equity is worth a tremendous amount more than when we bought it. And then we're able to help them come in and we think of it as every business has lids on the business. So we can talk about construction, what those lids are, but we are able to help. We see a lot. We work with a lot of companies, so we're able to see these lids in these businesses that are consistent. Right? We joke that everything tastes like chicken layer to business, and we're able to come in and say, hey, we've seen this work over here. Could we help you with this, or can we help you with that? And bring a lot of expertise that's rare in sort of the lower segment of the market. So we're typically working with businesses that have a minimum of about $3 million of earnings. And you can get large construction companies that are very, very profitable that still have a lot of professionalization that needs to be put into place.
Oh yeah.
And so we're oftentimes coming in. A lot of the stuff we talked about today is no business can be perfect. And by the way, I hope that nobody listening thinks that unless you check every box, you can't sell your business. There's no way. I've never seen a business that in construction or outside of it that even comes close to checking all those boxes. Yep. And what we're trying to do is work with the companies on an ongoing basis to try to push the envelope in each one of those key areas. Create redundancies, create diversification of skill sets, diversifications of relationships, build those processes, and really just professionalize the company to serve our customers better. I mean, the more that, this isn't just so that you can sort of internally pat each other on the back. You're doing all this work so that you can serve people better. I mean, if you don't serve your customers, they're not going to be your customers. And the more that we can serve them better, the more organized we are, the less errors we have, right? The more that we can get things done on time, that we're organized, the better they're going to really appreciate it, right? They're going to give us more work at higher margin, be less price sensitive. So, we're trying to work with these companies to do that and really in a very collaborative, kind, generous way.
And so how can people get in touch with you if they'd like to?
Yeah. So permanentequity.com. My email is the letter B. So the first letter of my first and last name at Permanent Equity. Happy to have people email me. We get outreach all the time. Happy to help if you think you might be a candidate to work with us. We'd love to chat with you. And otherwise, we're happy to point you in directions. We know a lot of people who would love to get involved in smaller companies, but don't really see the opportunity. And I know there's a tremendous amount of noise. I mean, any successful business these days is getting bombarded with, people who are, I think you said before we started recording that, a lot of people don't have the money to buy a business, but they still try to go after it. And I think there's a big difference. It's hard sometimes to tell between people who have the means and the expertise to really consummate a transaction between, as opposed to people who are out there pretending. So. Excellent.
Now, are you out there in Columbia, Missouri?
I am. Yeah. I love Columbia, Missouri.
Okay, so let me ask you: if someone is around Columbia, Missouri, what's your favorite place to take them out to for a meal?
Oh gosh, well, COVID's certainly been weird on that front. If you want a great hamburger, there's Booch's here in town.
Booch's.
Yeah, Booch's. It's just greasy sliders. It's like nice. A pool hall. It's awesome.
How do you spell that?
Booches.
I really, really appreciate your time. And I tell you, the insights here I know have been super useful to my audience. Appreciate your generosity.
Hey, thanks, Eric, for having me on. Appreciate it. Have a great
day. On. Today's episode was brought to you by the Construction Conclave. If you as a construction leader would like to develop your skills and get involved in a community of like-minded construction professionals who are focused on building healthy teams, profitable projects, and long-term successful businesses, then the Construction Conclave is for you. It's a private invitation-only group of construction leaders that are focused on developing their leadership skills. We do training every single month online that looks at how to become a better leader in a very practical, straightforward way. We also have other events that build community and camaraderie so that you can associate with others who are interested in developing their skills as leaders. If you'd like more information and to see if you qualify for participating in the conclave, feel free to reach out to me, eric@ericanderton.com. Thank you for listening to this episode of Construction Genius. Hope you found that 1% of inspiration to help you in the next few days. If you like the show, please give us a 5-star review on iTunes, share it with other construction leaders who you think would benefit, and thanks again for listening.